Alright everyone, welcome to a new video. In one of my previous videos I have been talking about the Moment Anamorphic Lens and the Moment Wide Lens, and I was comparing them to each other. And for some time now I have been thinking about making a follow-up video about these two lenses. When thinking about the contents of that specific video, I realized that that video was actually more about the anamorphic lens and it was about the wide lens. So here we go with a new video just about the anamorphic lens. And this video is all about confusions, misconceptions, things you might be getting wrong with the anamorphic lens. I've got 5 tips for you, and tip number 1 is actually about unboxing or using the lens for the first time. I've got the anamorphic lens all nicely boxed up, reboxed it up for you, so this is basically a re-unboxing. What a lot of people do is they take the lens out of the box, they open the box, find this little card in there, toss it out, grab the lens, toss out the box, or just place it on the bench over here. And what those people do, they mount the lens onto their phone, start taking photos, start taking videos. The first thing they realize when they look back their footage, or maybe while they are shooting it, is that all their lens flares aren't horizontal. Another thing that they will notice is that all their footage will have black bars on both the left and right side of that video. If you pay even closer attention, you might also see that everything you film, even when anamorphic D-squeeze is on, is just not how it's supposed to be. It's stretched in a really weird way. This might not be the case for you, but for a lot of people it might be the case, especially on newer phones. If you're on iPhone 10, iPhone XS, iPhone 11, Samsung Galaxy S9, phones like that. So what you want to do in this case is take the lens off of the phone, put the phone to the side, put the lens to the side for a second, look up the box and check the other contents of the box. There should be 2 things in the box that are important for this. One, that's actually a little anamorphic alignment guide. This guide will tell you exactly what you need to do to get this lens mounted correctly. This card should also come with 2 very tiny spare screws in case you lose the original screw. However, that shouldn't be a reason to lose the original screw on the lens. The next thing you want to look for is this fiber cloth bag that comes with the lens. You can use it to store the lens, but it's got one more important thing, and that's on the drawstring you should be able to find a very tiny 0.9mm Allen key. And this is what you need to rotate your lens to make sure that it's aligned correctly for your phone. If it's not on the drawstring, you might want to double check the box. And I've also seen a few cases where this little Allen key is actually hidden inside. Next up, you want to take your anamorphic lens and you want to look on the side where it says 1.33 times 1.33x, and next to that should be a very tiny screw. What you want to do is you want to lightly loosen the screw. There's no need to get it all the way out, you just want to give it a few turns. Want to make sure that the back of the lens, as you can see, it's already rotating a little bit, but you want to make sure that you can fully rotate it. So loosen it up just a little bit more, and now I can rotate it 90 degrees like so, so the screw itself lines up with a nice little V shape. You want to make sure that it's nicely aligned, that it's not a little bit off like so. You want to have it as perfect as you can. That just gives you better shots. And then you want to take that Allen key and tighten the screw again, meanwhile making sure that it's all nicely aligned. So next up, you want to mount this lens back onto your phone, and as you can see immediately, this already looks way better than it was before. And now if you're shooting video, you won't get those black bars on the left or on the right. You will get nice horizontal lens flares from direct light sources. So tip number 1, make sure that the lens is rotated correctly by using the little 0.9mm Allen key that came on the anamorphic back drawstring. I'm sitting here just on the edge of Edam. I'm here at the Edam fort, so Let's move over a little bit towards the fort. Unfortunately today it is closed, so we can't go in. We can have a nice little look on the outside, see what it looks like, and I'll give you the second tip over there. So here we are at the fort, the old building. The gates are currently closed, partly because it's a weekday, partly because of the lockdown with the corona situation. Sorry for squeezing my eyes, but I'm facing the sun at this time. And talking about the sun, that actually brings me to tip number 2, which is lens flares. And these lens flares that you can make with your anamorphic lens can also be created by pointing your anamorphic lens at other bright light sources. And what you might find if you're trying to capture these nice horizontal lens flares is that this lens flare is a blue flare. And a lot of people want a different color flare, and I can imagine that. So what they try to do is they try to get a different color light, but the lens flare still turns up blue. If you check the Moment website, you might see 1 or 2 pictures that show a different color lens flare. And those pictures have been taken with pre-production model lenses, ones that don't have the final coatings on them. But if you have a production model of the anamorphic lens like I do, you will always get a blue lens flare, and that's because of the coating on it. As you might have already seen, and as you should be able to see right now, I've set my phone up behind me, anamorphic lenses on it, it's on a tripod. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a few photos using the anamorphic lens. I'll shoot them both in RAW and in JPEG. One thing that I wanted to mention before we move on is if you're taking photos in JPEG, there can be 2 settings. In the app you can set the you can set apply anamorphic D-squeeze to your footage. You can set it on or off. By default this is a setting that is enabled, but if you have disabled it you will get a similar result as when shooting in RAW. Let's head over to the city center of Edam where I'll talk about the aspect ratios. Tip number 3. Here we are for tip number 3. Found a nice little place just next to the cheese market in Edam, which is like 100 meters away from the actual city center. As I said before when we were at the fort, tip number 3 is all about aspect ratios, especially when shooting with the anamorphic lens. By default, if you're shooting a photo with your phone in landscape orientation, you're getting a photo with an aspect ratio of 4:3. If you're shooting a video with your phone also in landscape orientation, you're getting a video of the well-known aspect ratio of 16:9, which is the standard wide video format that most of us see on YouTube, on television or anywhere. If you're shooting with the anamorphic lens, you want to get a cinematic wide. You may have seen it on the Moment website, or you may have done the calculations yourself, but you'll get an aspect ratio of close to 2.4:1, or even closer to 36:1. And how to calculate that width is actually very simple. What you do is, instead of 16:9, you take the 16, you multiply it by what it says on the side of the anamorphic lens, 1.33. 16 multiplied by 1.33 gives you a number that I could calculate with my phone. Eventually that's going to come down to an aspect ratio of 236:1. When you're shooting photos, that's for some people when it's getting complicated, and actually it isn't. What you do is you take the width, you multiply it by 1.33 like it says on the lens, and you get your new width. For photos, if you're shooting in RAW, what it comes down to is an aspect ratio that looks very similar to 16:9. So it looks very similar to your usual video. However, if you're using the Moment camera app and you've got the apply D-squeeze to file enabled and you're shooting in JPEG, that's when the app itself already applies the D-squeeze for you. Instead of getting you an aspect ratio that's close to 16:9 like you would get when D-squeezing your RAW file, you get a JPEG file that's actually 2.36:1, similar to your videos, and that's because the Moment camera app not only applies the D-squeeze but also crops the file for you to get a look that is very similar to your anamorphic videos. Now that we've talked about the aspect ratios, that brings me to tip number 4, which is again about the black bars with your anamorphic shots. And it's not about the fuzzy black bars on the left and the right when you've mounted your lens incorrectly. It's actually about the black bars that you get at the top and at the bottom of your video. Some people think that if they use this lens they will automatically get these black bars, and that's simply not true. This video that you're looking at right now is shot in 16:9. If I now insert an anamorphic D-squeezed video in here, you will get black bars at the top and at the bottom because the canvas that we're using, the 16:9 canvas that we're using, is bigger than the actual anamorphic video file. To get those black bars you want to use a canvas that's bigger than your actual file. And that's basically all there is to getting those black bars, but the lens itself doesn't add them for you. The anamorphic lens has been designed with a landscape orientation in mind. However, some people are wondering, can I use this lens also vertical in portrait orientation? That brings me to tip number 5, the last tip of this video. Simply said, yes, you can. I would apply it more to photos than to videos. If you want to take vertical photos with the anamorphic lens, you can definitely do so. Just be aware that your lens flares will also be vertical and everything will be stretched vertically for a higher image rather than a wider image. So that was 5 tips for using your anamorphic lens on your phone. And that brings us to the end of this video. That's 5 simple tips for using your anamorphic lens. Some confusions that are hopefully been cleared, that are out of the way now. Just to quickly rephrase them. Tip number 1, make sure that the lens is rotated correctly with the Allen key that comes with the lens. Tip number 2 is about those lens flares with your production model lens, because of the coatings on the lens will always be blue regardless of the color of your light. Tip number 3 was the aspect ratios, maybe the most complicated tip of all of these tips, but just keep in mind when you're using the anamorphic lens, whether you're shooting photos or videos, you have to multiply the width by 1.33 to get the new width. Tip number 4, the black bars at the top and at the bottom. Lens is not going to make them for you, but the canvas that you're working on, that's what's going to determine whether or not there will be black bars at the top and at the bottom. And tip number 5 was about using the lens in a vertical mode. Yes, you can. I'll be seeing you in another video, so be sure to subscribe to make sure that you'll see one.